Good afternoon, everyone. And Paul, thanks for that the vibey music there. My name is Luke Tannen, and I'm the Executive Director of Chicago Innovation, and I want to welcome you all to Innovation is for Everyone. We are now in our 20th year at Chicago Innovation, and I am joined next to me by the person who started it all, Tom Kuzmarski.
And we're so glad to see you here. And you know what? Finally, I can say it truthfully. I can't wait to see you all in person. And I know that's going to be really gosh darn soon. Today's event is Innovation is for Everyone. It is also the vision for Chicago Innovation to try to make that come true.
And it is an all-encompassing phrase covering race, age, gender, ethnicity, industry, sector, and much more. And it's an acknowledgement that everyone has a role in innovating towards a better future, and everyone should have access to the same resources to do so.
And I'm encouraged by the effort and the momentum over the past year, but we're not done yet. There's more to do. And in our communities of color in particular, we have a lot more to do to make sure that innovation is accessible to everyone.
That's right, Tom. And that's why we've built Chicago Innovation into an engine to educate, connect, and celebrate people around innovation, no matter their background, experience, industry, location, or passion.
And Chicago is full of people with dreams, with grit, with hardworking work ethics, with something to offer. And we've got to make sure that those dreams are able to come true and provide the resources that are so essential.
And if you have a question for the panel today, please send it to us via the Zoom Q&A. We will be spending the last 15 minutes or so addressing everyone's questions. Also keep an eye out for a couple polling questions so we can learn more about you, the audience. Now, I want to recognize our year-round sponsors who help make everything possible that we do at Chicago Innovation. And that starts with our diamond sponsors, SMS Assist, Wintrust, Accenture, and Walgreens. Our gold sponsors, Comcast Business and Exelon. Silver sponsor, Vetter Price. Bronze sponsors, Energy BBDO, Crown Castle, LK, Thompson Coburn, Ramsey Innovations, Groupon, and Aero Digital Labs. And then also our media partners who help us spread the word, Intersection, Clear Channel Outdoor, WBBM News Radio, NBC Chicago, and Crane's Chicago Business.
Our speakers today know all about innovating a path forward. And we were able to get the best person to lead this discussion. Her name is Sandy Castillo. Sandy is the president and co-founder of IC Stars, a wonderful, wonderful nonprofit organization that really takes a special step towards developing leadership and technology skills in adults, in inner city adults, and it's transformational. I mean, it really, truly is. And she's the president and co-founder of it. She's also on the board of Chicago Innovation, and we love her deeply. Please welcome Sandy Castillo.
Thanks, Tom. Boy, you really do know how to make a girl smile. So, hey, it's great to be here. I think this is an amazing conversation that we're going to have around innovation. And I love the subtitle of Rewrite the Future, to rewrite the future, and how powerful that is if we think about it, with that the future is in front of us and we're writing it as we speak. And speaking of writing the future, I'm so excited to introduce our awesome panelists. And I'd like to also call them space makers, because they're making space for innovation, for community, and for change. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Gloria Castillo. She is the director of We Rise Together for an Equitable and Just Recovery at the Chicago Community Trust. And she leads a $37 million and growing fund to advance equity across the Chicago region. She's a former longtime and long-loved CEO of Chicago United. And then we also have Will Towns, who's joining us. Will is the managing director at 4S Bay Partners, and he's an adjunct professor of social impact at Kellogg Public-Private Interface. He's managed more than 800 million in capital during his career, directed at reversing economic disparities and racial discrimination. So let's begin by getting to know you, the audience. So here's our first poll. What best describes your organization or your sector? Show us the poll. There we go. And here it is. A lot of corporate friends out there. And so good. It's good to know that we are in good company. All right. Thank you. So, you know, we're coming out of a year that shook many people out of complacency when it comes to pursuing serious change as it relates to race, to equity, and inclusivity. But we've been shaken before, right? Only to settle back into our old ways. So is this moment in time different? And if so, how? How is it different? So I'll say Gloria, ladies first.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And Sandy, it's good to see you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again.
I know.
Well, let me just say that, you know, what in this past year, kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion have become the buzzwords of 2021. And I think there are a lot of people who feel as though they've had their consciousness raised. But what's different in my observation is that there seems to be a deeper level of self-reflection. You know, really thinking about bias, thinking about racism. And I would point to the bestseller lists as kind of the evidence that people are honestly taking time to read and think and reflect in this moment. And we've seen more engagement from white allies than we've seen at other times. I mean, I think we've seen evidence of, you know, the protests that are not only people of color. We've actually been joined in large numbers by our white allies who actually, I think, have taken this moment to think about their role. And so I think that is different in this moment. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that people are actually talking about how injustice is structured in systems in ways that we haven't had that conversation broadly before. There have always been advocates who have talked about it, who have documented it, who have researched it and have shared their learnings. But I think this is the first time that I have seen people really try to think about the structures that they are personally involved in their workplace, for example, or in their neighborhoods or in their schools, understanding where the inequities are structured in. And so I think people for the first time are thinking about how do we reimagine our institutions? How do we redesign our institutions in a way that allow us to be more equitable? And for myself in this new initiative, We Rise Together for an Equitable and Just Recovery, we're really committed to working with community in order to reimagine the work. And so I think for me, after, you know, it's not just decades of injustice, it's 400 years of injustice. It's wonderful to have a moment where I actually feel the energy of people coming together in a different way. Not to say that everybody's coming with us, because that's clearly not the case. But we have a large group now, and it feels pretty good to see that momentum.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to introduce the great Desiree Rogers, who's here. Desiree, of course, we all know and love her. She's the CEO of Black Opal Cosmetics and the former CEO of Johnson Publishing, the former chair of Choose Chicago, and the first social secretary for President Barack Obama. We're so glad you're here.
Yes, I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here now.
Yay, great. We're just kicking off, and we're talking about what's different. Is this time different, and if so, how? when we come to talk about serious change as it relates to equity and inclusivity. So, and Gloria just had some really great comments about like people taking self-reflection and systems thinking, and that being pervasive, not just in small pockets, but across the board. So Desiree, what about you? What do you think? Is this fly by night? Is it different this time? What do you see?
I don't think it's fly by night. I do think that it is different in many respects. I feel that it's kind of, everything's been bubbling up to a point and we've kind of bubbled over. We've always given a little bit of bubbling, like a gumbo. And now you've got everybody coming together and saying, hey, we have bubbled over. We have gone a bit too far, whether that be our youth that's marching in the street alongside with people of my generation. I think everyone is talking about diversity. They might not exactly understand what they're talking about, but I think people know that the air is just different and that people are taking more responsibility for how perhaps they can impact, the future. That's not to say that everybody's on board, but I don't think you can ignore it in this country that something has changed. And that, from a business perspective, I think people are more aware than they've ever been, but they're not going to change. Things aren't going to change overnight, but I would say we have a stage is what I would say. And it is our opportunity to make certain that we can come correct on that stage.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. I love that it's bubbled over. Like I really feel that, like it has bubbled over. William, what do you see in terms of, is this sticking? Is it different? How so?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, I think as the other panelists, both Gloria and Desiree have said, it is different. I think it's different for a couple of reasons. I think one, there's this notion I refer to as sort of societal recalibration, which is this notion that there are a lot of activities sort of changing at the same time. So, this access to information, the advent of the video camera and phones and these sorts of things, like all these things are sort of contributing to this sort of sustained sort of movement, right? Again, the videos of the Floyd and these sort of incidences that even those who are on the fence can't deny, right? This sort of thing sort of coming to fruition, I think really has, as Desiree said, sort of boiled people over. And in adding what Gloria says, then to look at the structure and how things have sort of been set up to sort of recognize and sort of move forward. I think the other thing is the demographics. And again, Gloria touched on this. There is a broad swath of people who are in the movement and are upset, right? We've got the Generation Zs and the millennials who are here, and many of the Zs could not even imagine if you tried to tell them that these things happened before, couldn't picture it, right? They're growing up in a time of Barack Obama, they're growing up in a time of Beyonce, and these people have seen as sort of worldwide recognized sort of individuals. And so when they see these atrocities, they're not sort of going back to, oh no, it's the old thing again. They're more like, what the heck is going on, right? And so they really sort of then push to sort of move out. And I think that youth component and their ability on how they're changing, how businesses react, how businesses are hiring people. They're going into the job force, not asking about vacation time. They're worried about what the 401k is invested in, right? And is it in diversity? Is it in environmentally friendly devices? These sorts of things. And so I think that combination of real sort of access to information and technology, the growing impact of the youth and the Generation Z movement, and then these sort of events caught on camera that I think has really caused people to pause and say, is it really that bad? We've got to do something. And I think it's that sort of movement that we're seeing. And I do believe it's sustainable, but it is a marathon, right? This isn't a sprint. And so it will take time as we continue for each individual, each corporation to evaluate their own pluses and minuses in this space, and then how are they going to address the issues and concerns around equity and inclusion.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And I think, you're all touching on such important things, like, the systems level thinking, the youth and access, and the notion that we have a stage. And I love what you said, Desiree, about coming correct on that stage. And so what is being heard? What is being built? You know, with any kind of breaking down comes the opportunity to rebuild. And I think we all sort of have witnessed this from the comfort of our couch or the discomfort in my couch. But the pandemic broke down all these things. We saw businesses and institutions and even individual attitudes and perspectives, as you were saying. So what opportunities do you all see as we rebuild our businesses, as we rebuild our institutions, and to some degree, as we rebuild ourselves? Like to Gloria's point earlier. So how do we make the most of this moment, of this opportunity to create a more inclusive and an equitable environment? What do you think? Will, I'll just go right back to you.
Okay. I think this notion of intentionality becomes incredibly important. And these things happen in sort of phases, right? So the first phase is the well said. Everyone comes out, makes a statement, they hang a banner, they, throw an event or do something, they kneel in front of all sorts of things to sort of show their sort of solidarity for it. And that's great. The question is, how do we move to well done, right? How do we move from well said to well done? And that takes time, that takes real reflection, and there is some pain in that transition, right? To sort of really sort of move and to really sort of think about how are we either contributing for inequities or not contributing towards equity, right? So it's not just to say I'm not causing harm. That's not good enough. It's like, how am I moving the efforts sort of forward? And I think we'll see in a lot of individuals and our leaders as well, this is a tough conversation, right? Can you separate yourself from the policy, right? When we're talking about a policy that's disadvantaging a group of people, is the individual, the leader, offended that somehow they're being seen as racist or they're being seen as the cause? Or is it, hey, can I separate myself from the policy, understand what the policy is doing, and then put the necessary corrections in to ensure that we have a path that is at least we're acknowledging where these hurdles are being made or put up, and then how do we then sort of address those in a way, given whatever our structure of our business and policy and rules and regulations are, to address it. And so I think it is this intentional, direct purpose and search for solutions that are really, I think, going to be the challenge in how we rebuild this. It's not enough to get back to pre-COVID, right? We recognize that's a point, but that's not where we need to go. The veil has been removed, the curtain has been pulled back, and it's not going back up. And so now that we're all looking at what's been created and what has caused here, the real question is, then how do we all roll up our sleeves in a way that moves our communities, individuals, and people forward?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Desiree, you look like you wanted to add on to that.
Well, I guess what I would say is the one thing I love about what Will said is this idea of how do we get to great, and how do we think about that in our daily work? I know for myself, having gone through the last year, and everything that encompassed, I'll never be the same. And I don't think any of us will ever be the same. We may not realize directionally, what's changed in us, but a lot has changed in us. And it's going to take us a while to settle into what is the new us. The one thing I think is important is that, how can I get to great? What can I do? And how can I move myself, move the relationships that I have the right voice at the table. When I say the right voice, not a voice that is shying away from what the conversation needs to be, which is, I have to admit, maybe before I'm like, do I really want to take this all on today? Guess what? I am fired up and ready to go. So I am taking on things that I thought I would never really take on in the same way, because somehow I feel like time is short.
Mm-hmm.
Made me really feel like time has collapsed. Time is shorter than I ever thought time was, and things can change so quickly. Overnight, this country had to change and adapt. And so I want to do as much as I can, as fast as I can. And I was always pretty speedy on things. But this whole idea of diversity, this whole idea of inclusion, this whole idea of standing up for what I believe in each and every day, and trying to get to great, and I will tell you, there's some groups that you know, and I don't want to get into specific names because that's not a nice thing to do, but I've made some decisions to put my money where my mouth is. And so if I've not been able to see the kind of movement that I would like to see, or the kind of attention to the things that we're talking about, then it's probably going to be done without me. And I'm not certain that I would have had the whatever, wherewithal, guts, whatever you want to call it, chutzpah, whatever you want to call it, to just say, you know what, I'm going to pass. And I'm not only am I passing, but I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do something else that fits into, you know, what we're talking about. And I'm not going to do it in a nasty way, but I'm going to make certain that it is known that this is what is important to me. And so that is where I'm going to be putting my money.
And that's such an important stand to make, right? Like there's so many ways that we move, you know, from the intentionality of, okay, I'm making a statement, I'm putting it on the website, to I'm doing something meaningful that's going to impact others.
Yeah,
to
well,
move-
we're all in charge of us, right? That's the one thing we can be in charge of.
Yeah. And that it's very energizing once we acknowledge that, because then we know what to do. I think a lot of folks don't know, you know, how can I contribute? How can I do something?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great points.
And it's not all about money. That's just one aspect.
Right. And, you know, time is our most precious commodity. It's where we choose to spend that time. What do you think, Gloria? You think, how can we make the most of this opportunity right now to create a more equitable environment?
Well, what we know is, and I think Will rightly pointed to the fact that people were very well intentioned when they made their solidarity statements, and we start with intentionality for sure. But we also know a lot of really well intentioned efforts never really became proximate to community.
Mm.
And I think that is something that we really need to pay attention to. We can't do things for communities of color. We can only do things with communities of color if we're going to create real change, because that is about the empowerment of people in their own communities who do have great knowledge. I mean, there are assets in our communities that we have not deployed because people didn't trust the people in community. And now people in community don't trust those who were well-intentioned before. So we have a good deal of work to do to build that trust. And, you know, if you think about how we actually build a strong region, you know, if Chicago is roughly a third Black, a third Latinx, a third white, we know that's not exact, but roughly. And coming out of the Great Recession, we left so much of the Black and Latinx community behind. We can't do that again. We can't leave 2/3 of the population behind and think that as a region, we are going to be strong. So, you know, for me, it's really about what are the concrete actions that people are going to take beyond the solidarity statements that are actually going to benefit people of color, but in doing so, benefit everyone. And so, you know, that could be in the private sector. That can be really rethinking their hiring policies and their pay and compensation policies. You know, in the public sector, really thinking about public policies and public practices. So, you know, I'll give you, we always talk about policy, but there are practices that actually have a great deal of impact on our communities. So, you know, it could be things like, how does your community feel when you walk through it? Is it clean? Are there garbage cans where you can throw something away? In Lincoln Park, there are garbage cans. In Englewood, there are not. There's no public policy that says you're going to put more garbage cans in one neighborhood than in another. But the practical impact is that it's harder to keep one community clean than another. So I think when we think about systems and we think about how we treat people, we need to go deep. We need to look at all of those things: policy, practice, and really being proximate to the people who have deep knowledge about their own communities and what they see and what their aspirations are, and build to those aspirations with them.
Yeah, wow, that's so powerful. I love your 3 Ps: policy, practice, and proximity. So good. Yeah. And so you're bringing us to the next point, which is, all right, let's talk about talent. We know diversity is important to build stronger teams, but we also know that folks are still struggling to build diverse teams. So what do you think are the best practices for finding, recruiting, and nurturing diverse talent in our organizations? Will, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll dive in. I think one of the things is the diversity yields diversity, and it's been proven in sort of research that in fact, if this is a university institution, the more minority faculty you hire, the more minority students enrolled, and when it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. And we have to sort of break up who's on these search committees, who's a part of the leadership within the teams that are sort of putting the jobs and things together. It isn't enough to say we've had great employees or leaderships in the past, and we want our future leaders to have the same talents and things as we had in the past. That yields the same results. And so we need to really, I think, be more diverse around how we offer opportunities, what a pool of candidates look like before it even goes up to the committee to be reviewed, and really start to think about these sorts of things. Diversifying where we're pulling talent from, right? We can't simply just continue to go to the Kellogg's, the Booths, the Harvards, those sorts of places. How do we sort of diversify those where our state schools, our community colleges, where are those opportunities for individuals to be exposed to what we have to offer? And then I think, somewhat, maybe some people see as controversial, we need targets. We've got to really look at what our sort of organization looks like today. As Gloria sort of said, you look at the city, a third, and then you say, okay, what does our employee base look like? And start to really go out and again, intentionally sort of understand. That might mean we advertise in different places. It might mean we're actually out in the community talking with people about opportunities and things. And I think those are just sort of a few of the easier sort of steps that need to happen in thinking about how do we sort of diversify our roles. Lastly, I'll just say, we also have to reevaluate the job descriptions and really sort of look at individuals for the talents and things that they have. Many people in our community have potential and talent, but it may not show up on the resume the same as someone else. And so how do we sort of pull out those talents and things to really sort of get there? And in teaching, I think our individuals to boast more about the things that they actually do. When I actually sit down and talk with individuals, you find out they have more talent, more interest, more things than perhaps that shows up on their resume and in conversations. And so this might be leading a community group. This might be babysitting in some cases. It might be other sort of challenging things that they've sort of run into. And how do we sort of get them to talk about that in a more positive way and show that that's a part of their whole person and bringing that into the conversations. Again, just a few ideas.
Yeah, great ideas, Will. And I think even like giving folks an opportunity to show their talents, right? So sort of moving beyond the resume page to more task-based interviews where people are able to flex some of that muscle. Yeah. Gloria, what do you think? Best practices for finding, retaining, and advancing talent?
One of the things that I always suggest to folks in the corporate arena is look at your current talent. You hired them because you thought they were going to be successful. You brought them into your firm because you thought they were going to be successful. So are you really treating them equitably? The first thing you can do is conduct a pay audit. Are you really paying people and compensating them equally, equitably, based on their experience, based on their position? When they do, most companies, when they actually conduct those pay audits, they really find that there's a good deal of disparity. And so that's a good place to start. And the next thing I would say is think about your competency models. So as you build leadership, every corporation has competency models. So you know what it takes to move to the next level. Is your diversity and inclusion skill set part of your competency model? How are you going to build an inclusive company if you don't actually have models that say, this is how we will advance you? If you are going to be a leader, these are skills that you have to have in place. And so, really starting with the people who work for you today is critically important. And then as you start to recruit, I think Will has gone through the recruiting process, which is so important, in the diverse slate and the diverse panel that reviews and interviews. And so you can't have a diverse slate and then have those who are conducting the interviews not be diverse as well. So you've really got to balance those two things and then pull out some of those artificial barriers. Sometimes companies put in degree requirements where there is not a requirement. And so, really look at whether or not every requirement is necessary for particular jobs, because sometimes that's just a screening mechanism, and you could really attract great talent. And the final thing I would say is, when we look particularly for women of color, it is looking at potential. So what we know is that for years, men have been hired based on their potential, and women have been based on having proven their competencies. And so it creates a disparity, particularly for women of color. And so we're not really looked at for our potential, where white males are often hired for their potential. So really suss that out in your culture. Is that your culture? How are you hiring people? Because if you're hiring on potential, then you better have a model that tells you, here objectively is how we assess potential. So there are really concrete actions that can be taken.
Yeah, thank you. Really important. And Desiree, any thoughts on, finding and recruiting and nurturing talent?
Well, listen, I think my panelists have done a terrific job on that question. The one thing I would say publicly is we are looking to hire. So we're growing. And so if people have good people they want to send my way, bless you, bless you, bless you. I know I sound like, where are the people? But we're working so hard on our work. It's hard sometimes to find that time that's needed to really think carefully about that hiring and to really seek out, people that can help you with that. So I'm looking. I think they would enjoy the experience. We have a diverse group of people that are working on this ethnic cosmetic space. And so I'm surrendering and asking for the help. How's that? That's what I think.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here, Chicago Innovation. Desiree's looking for talent. Awesome. Desiree, let's stay with you. You've been a leader across sectors at the highest levels in corporate and government, nonprofit worlds. And in all of those arenas, you've advocated for change and progress. And I want to just get inside your head and learn how you pursue missions of progress, even when they aren't initially popular. So how do you move and motivate people? How do you educate yourself and others? How do you give people roles and make them feel like an important part of the solution?
Mhm.
And I think this is really in kind of the nurturing of talent.
So I don't know if people would call me nurturing. Let's start with that. But this is what I would say. I mean, I think that building a culture and building a team that feels nurtured and feels like they're a part of something bigger than themselves is absolutely what you want to do as a leader. And over this COVID period, we've actually started to do some more work in that area, starting with a little analysis of myself and really understanding, who I am, what makes me tick, but most importantly, how I interact with others and how you interpret what some others might say and try to make that work for you.
Mhm.
I am, the guy said to me, and again, all this was done on paper, which was so remarkable. 15 minutes. He said, your middle name is win, win, win. you don't lose. If the game is not going the way that you want the game, you will go and create another game so you can win. And so I'm not, so my daughter said, that's terrible, Mom. You should be like trying to win in that game. I said, this is what it is. So I think, a part of this is really this understanding yourself better, trying to make improvements along the way, trying to make certain that not only does the team need to understand me, I need to understand them. And we don't have to love each other every day, but we got whatever mission it is we have in front of us. And we need to find the easiest route to working together so that there's a minimal amount of disruption among us, especially with everything that's going on in the world. People are looking for comfort to some extent.
Yeah.
Because we haven't had comfort. And so I feel that if you can create an environment and lead in an environment where you have outlined, what it is that you're going to be doing as a team, and be honest about, hey, I didn't like that. You said, just stop. We don't need any more drama. We've had enough drama for our lifetimes. And so if we can just open ourselves up to not be emotional about everything that everyone said about this and about that, and try to have those real meaningful conversations, to me, that's what I'm working on as a leader. And I'm trying to put myself out there in a way that perhaps I've never done before with both friends and employees and team members. Listen, can we just, and just, I'm trying to be a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
Because I've been so driven to get things done that people interpret that maybe sometimes in a more negative way than it should be. So, trying to ask some of those like simple questions that may be a part of someone else's demeanor, where I'm thinking, who wants me all in their business asking about this and that and that? They probably just want to get the work done and get on to the fun, so just trying to think a little bit differently in terms of not just always of how I would do it, but how other people might want to interact with me and what signals I'm sending as a leader that I didn't even realize I was sending because I'm so focused on getting the work done and kind of staying ahead of the team and making certain I'm clearing a path for them to do their best work.
Yeah. And to win.
Yeah. So sometimes you got to turn back and say, okay, guys, let's slow it down a little bit and let's talk about what does everyone else, think, and let's hear all the opinions and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm work in progress over here. Definitely work in progress. So I'm an innovation in progress.
Thank you. And thank you for being so transparent about that. My team calls me a snuggly dictator.
Oh,
and
I like that though.
Right? Like at first I was like,
whoa,
yeah, there it is, right? Like, and it's kind of like that both sides, but knowing ourselves as leaders makes all the difference in the world, because then we sort of come as we are to our teams, and we have the ability to listen because they know it, right? Like, yeah. So what, Will and Gloria, then you guys are both tackling one of the largest barriers when it comes to making innovation for everyone a reality. And that's funding, of course. So tell us about what you're working on, the impact so far, and how people tuning in can benefit or get involved or write checks. So Gloria, tell us about it.
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I recently taken the role of director of We Rise Together for an equitable and just recovery. And what we know is that COVID has really exposed the persistent economic and health divides and disparities between the Black and Latinx communities and our white counterparts. And that's true in Chicago and throughout the country. But here locally, when we think about what's happened during this time, we know that the Black and Latinx communities have been most impacted. But even before that, there was a 30-year lifespan difference between Streeterville and Englewood. So this is not just COVID. But since we're here, we've got to make a commitment that we come out of this better. And that's really where I've been focused now. And so what we've decided to do with We Rise Together with our partners, coming from the philanthropic world and business, is we've launched a fund. And it's more than just a fund. It's really about leveraging the resources of philanthropy, business, the nonprofit community, local government, and community working together. And I think that's really key, that we talk about resources, not just funding, because everybody brings different assets and different resources to this initiative. And the critical part is breaking down the silos. So in general, what you've seen philanthropy work on a project and think that they are going to have the solutions. You have business working from a different perspective, thinking that they're going to have the solutions. You have government working from their perspective. And so where we are really trying to reimagine how you invest in communities is bringing those resources together in a true multi-sector approach with community voice at the center, so that we're not retrofitting the community voice after decisions have been made, but actually centering with what are the community-led projects? What's the vision and aspiration of the community? How do we bring all of those resources together? And so I call that stacking resources. Our goal is to raise $250 million, and that will be the money that we can use in our kind of what I call our cornerstone projects, but where we make our big investments. But $250 million may sound like a lot of money, but when you are looking at the needs across the city and the investment that's required to create thriving communities, it's a small amount of money. And that's why the stacking of resources becomes so important, because when we make an investment, we can attract private capital. When we attract private capital, we can also align that with what the city is doing and where now some of the federal resources are going to be placed. We've got to make sure that we're not duplicative, but we're aligning those resources in ways that we can actually have catalytic impact. And so that's what We Rise is doing, is really taking advantage of leveraging these resources, bringing together philanthropy, business, nonprofit, community, and local government to actually reimagine neighborhoods and invest in those neighborhoods in a catalytic way, but in a way that involves community. So people can certainly write checks to We Rise. That's certainly one way that they can help.
Awesome. And I think you're spot on with the, with versus for, and that it's all centered at the community. If we can get that right, that we're doing this with the community versus for them, I think that's the ticket. So yeah, thanks. And what about you, Will? Talk to us about what you're working on and the impact so far.
Yeah, so I just, again, can't say enough about what Gloria is doing in the initiative that she's leading, right? And this sort of notion of starting at the core of the community, right? And so for me, the way you work in a community is you listen, understand, and support. Like that's it. It's not leading, it's not doing that they actually have the solutions. They've been working on the problems a long time. And this sort of coordinating, as she said, and stacking, I think is incredibly important. In Forest Bay, we want to be a part of that stack, right? And sort of really be able to come in and partner with others to sort of do that. And so we're a family office, and we look to invest in Black and women-led firms, primarily in and around the Chicagoland area, but across the country as well. And so we're trying to sort of figure out, how do we provide the equity capital necessary to allow our businesses to achieve their full potential, right? How do we sort of think about if you had a wealthy friend and family person who could come in and provide reasonable capital and support? These are the kinds of things that we're really trying to do. But we recognize that the capital, although a big component, is not the only piece, right? And that you need financial capital, you need social capital, you need intellectual capital. And so we look to figure out how in our investments we can provide or connect the businesses that we're trying to support to those other possible stacks of capital. And I think, Gloria said it well, we need our private sectors to really sort of move in. And one prime example of that is McKinsey Scott gave away $4 billion in 4 months, right, in donations. And I can't tell you looking now if it's moved anything, right? I mean, that's how big the problem is. Significant amounts of capital coming in. And 6 months later, you're kind of like, oh, that was what happened with that? What's going on? And so we need all of our efforts sort of moving forward. We need not just the philanthropic arms of our corporations moving to support and help. We need the corporations themselves through their employment, through their supply chains, through their hiring practices. Like all of those are engines of generations to really sort of help propel what we're trying to do, which is to, again, to have belief that there are individuals within our communities and in our neighborhoods that don't have to leave in order to be successful. And that we believe enough in the ingenuity and creativity of our Black and brown and women-led firms here in Chicago that we're willing to step up and provide some capital support and other helps and initiatives and bring people together to see them sort of move forward. And that we believe that that's a good foundation from which to build a strong and vibrant community.
Yeah, great. Let's take another poll and get your questions ready because we're going to go into Q&A soon. So the poll is, over the past year, have you seen significant change within your organization as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Simple yes or no. Change. Have you seen it? Good. So, 62% of us are saying yes, we're seeing it, and 38% say no, we've still got some more work to do. Thanks, everybody. Okay. So Will and Gloria, like there's a twofold problem stunting investment in minority-led businesses. There's a clear lack of leadership, diversity in the startup receiving investments, and there's a clear lack of diversity when we look at the people doing the investing. How can we fix this? How do we tackle this?
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is if there's only two sides of the coin and there's problems on both sides, then we have a problem, right? I mean, it's just basically how we have to sort of look at this. And so we need to recognize that there needs to be support and technical support and assistance on both sides of this. It isn't that we don't have minority businesses that aren't ready to get investment, right? We know that the businesses are out there, they have a market, a product, and those sorts of things. But they may need some assistance in ensuring that they have the proper documentation, paperwork, and things, depending on the type of financing and things that they're getting. This shows up when the government issues PPP loans, and you find out that our businesses and our communities don't have the proper documentation, didn't file the taxes correctly, and these things. And so they're disproportionately sort of affected. Many of them may not have a personal banking relationship. Where you find many of the small businesses that got the capital, it came from their banker sort of saying, hey, here's this opportunity, I'm filling it out, and here you go. So we need to sort of work on those relationships a little bit as well. On the investor side, there just needs to be, again, a clear sort of understanding and thorough thoughtfulness on how your investment policy statements may be disproportionately impacting certain segments of individuals in our society. Case in point, we had an investment in the past where it was an African-American barber on the far south side of the city, had a decent amount of cash flow, but had a pretty high revolving credit line where every month he hit the max on his credit card, paid it down, hit the max again. We have an all-white investment committee that's looking at this and saying, this looks like this is a bad investment. Why is his credit rating going up and down? This seems to be, credit cards maxing out each month. This seems to be tough. It's a barbershop. I don't quite understand what's going on. So in this case, one, you first tackle the credit issue and you say, well, first of all, if we know that individuals are having a hard time accessing capital that's needed to fund their business, then the only way to fund the business is to run the credit cards up. So we can solve that problem by simply making the investment. Two, if you're not familiar with sort of the historical, cultural sense of a barbershop in a community, then you also are missing out on the potential. And so we had two sorts of problems here where one, they were using some standard sort of evaluations to apply this to this business, which disproportionately impacted people who can't get loans. And then two, not understanding the historical significance of a barbershop in a community and why this would be a thriving business was 2. So those can be solved by, I think, diversifying, again, the board and getting people sort of understand these markets. And it's not necessarily the fault of this committee. If we were investing in rocket ships, I'd be a bad investor. I'd see nothing but risk everywhere you look. But you have to have people sort of understand these markets on here, people from the community that can tell you, why is this grocery store or this corner business or this business viable and should be thriving? And that has to come through long due diligence processes and diversifying people who are on your committee that allow them to bring their personal selves into the discussion and not simply just looking at numbers on a board from some formula that's been long outdated.
Yeah, yeah, great point, Will. And I think even to Gloria's point earlier, if we center the community, we could have subject matter experts from the community who are then informing and educating people if we saw them as an asset, right? If it's all changing our perceptions. Yeah. Gloria, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about creating wealth in our communities, that's a big part of it. And we have to really focus on closing this wealth gap, because for many entrepreneurs, they go to friends and family. And so if you don't have wealth in the community, it's awfully hard to go to friends and family. So we need to have that as part of the entire picture when we think about entrepreneurship. The huge wealth gap that we have, we've got to close that. And that's a critical part. What we're doing at We Rise, though, is we are actually partnering with a corporate coalition who is developing the EPIC Fund. And that is really focused on catalytic real estate investments. And so we don't have a lot of developers of color, and we don't have a lot of folks who are willing to invest with those who are creating developments, neighborhood built environment developments. And so we've got to find a way to have more patient capital, capital that can be used as an equity-like instruments. We've got to get more creative. And so I think this particular fund, using funds that they're raising from the corporate community to develop these more patient instruments, are going to be really important in order for us to build greater capacity for the developers of color, build that technical skill sets. If you haven't had money in the past, it's awfully hard to build the skill sets that come with building big developments. And so we need to have this kind of intentional work that allows us to do the big projects. And, we all love the small projects, and the micro projects are important, but we have to have a balance between the small projects and the large projects in order for us to build wealth in our communities.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny that we're talking about equity and equity.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yes.
So, Desiree, I want to flash back to August of last year when you received the award for the Chicago Innovation in Gala. And you mentioned in your remarks fascination with Leonardo da Vinci and the insight that innovation is driven by curiosity. I love that. I'm a teacher. So, right, like that's it. So what are you most curious about right now? And if Da Vinci was around today, what problems do you imagine he'd want to solve?
Wow, that's my question.
That's your question.
I am curious about everything. I mean, the conversation that we were just talking about, this whole idea of the wealth gap among the majority of the population and brown and Black people is, something that I'm going to try to just do a tiny bit of work in that arena, whether that is, being a voice of explanation or an entry to another, my world, if I'm sitting on a board in a board seat, or really, trying to navigate through an industry where there are very few people on the business side of the table that look like me in the beauty industry, and trying to explain to them, how difficult it is to create, a beauty business of scale without a significant capital. is, kind of, what I'm curious about is, can I be successful or not as I try to push and maneuver. I just happen to choose this part of the business, a bit of this part of business, or this kind of business, I should say. I think I'm also curious to see whether or not Black and brown people will support their own more in business, and that they will look for opportunities to support people that look like them, because that, in my mind, is a big piece of us getting over whatever, and growing our own wealth in our communities. Because if you support businesses that happen to be of color, chances are they're going to hire people that look like us. And then chances are, they're going to be investing back in that community. So we have to get to a point where that becomes important and not just a rallying cry. If
Yeah.
I were with Da Vinci, gosh, I'd have so many questions. But I think, I don't know. I think he might be thinking, how can I creatively solve, what I'm going to say right now is we just seem to be, the world seems to be out of sorts. We're all over the place. How can I create a path of innovation and curiosity that I can gather up more people than not? How can I get them to open their minds to what that next level of life might look like? I don't mean Mars, I don't mean space, but a life that seems a little less, I don't know what else to say, but out of sorts. I just think we can't get it together. We're just, a little piece over here, a little piece over there. Where's the unity? Is there some kind of way to get people in larger groups to move us directionally down a path that might be a little bit more civil, a little bit more welcoming of innovation and of different ideas, but still get to some kind of answer we can all accept? We're right now in this what I would call this, extreme fighting mode. And part of that is because of the change, at least in this country, that's happening in terms of just, who may have perceived themselves as being empowered and what the numbers look like over the next 10 years. And so this is what happens when you have this kind of shift, this demographic shift that we see happening is people are afraid. They're not used to it. They don't know where what's their seat going to be at the table? Are they going to have a seat at the table? And instead of figuring out, like, how can we make that table wider? We're like, let's make certain that we protect our seat, because if I lose my seat, it's like that game, what was that game where the chairs went away?
Musical chairs, yeah.
Yes. It's like that. It's like, why not just put more chairs out there?
That's right. Right?
Why you got to keep taking chairs away, and be standing as one person? So I would say Da Vinci would create a way for us to have a bigger table. That's what I think.
Beautiful, well put. Oh my gosh, you guys, we're at time, and I feel like we could just keep talking forever. Like I apologize to you, dear audience, because we weren't even able to take a question because this conversation got so juicy.
Sandy, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Someone did send a question that I think is a perfect, quick wrap-up question. Can we take this one real fast?
Yeah. Please
Okay,
do.
so Dave Bartel is asking, what is one most important message that we should walk away with today if we don't hear anything else?
All right, let's do it. Lightning round. What's the one thing you want everybody to know?
I'll jump in. Take personal responsibility for creating change. Don't wait for somebody else. Take personal responsibility.
Do it.
I'll say, think of this. The only love there is the love we make.
Ooh.
Wow.
Bill, yes.
I don't know what to say to all that. I mean, I think these guys, covered it, but I guess I would say is, continue to be curious and, we can do this. We can win. We can do this. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear is the enemy. That's what I would say.
Heck yeah. And I'll say innovation is for everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you so much. You guys are awesome and smart, and you're future facing, which is what's so exciting because we know that some great things are possible. And we're grateful to know that you guys are in the world making it so. So thank you, Tom and Luke, and to all the sponsors. I'll turn the microphone back to you, Luke.
Great. Thank you, Sandy, for doing a terrific job leading today's session. And Desiree, Gloria, and Will, you are an outstanding panel. I wish we could clone the four of you. I think the world needs more people like you. And though we can't clone you, at least not yet, and you know, we hang out with the innovators. We haven't seen the cloning machine yet. We can at least clone and spread your ideas. And so thank you for sharing your personal perspective, stories, experiences, and ideas that made this a fantastic, honest discussion about a very important topic. And thank you for everything that each of you are doing to advance this conversation forward. But you know, more importantly, the actions that you've taken to make Chicago a more inclusive community. We all know actions speak louder than words, and I think that all of us are inspired by what you've done and what each of you continue to do for so many people in the city. And then finally, I want to thank our great audience who tuned in and for being part of our Chicago Innovation community now in its 20th year. We have more events and programming planned for this year than ever before, and the next opportunity for all of us to get back together is on June 3rd for a virtual event called Innovating Towards Sustainability. And it will explore the role that innovation is playing to help organizations address sustainable economic development and well-being for their own employees, companies, and the world. So stay tuned for that invitation in the coming days. And in the meantime, stay well. Everyone enjoy the warm Chicago weather outside of your own house, because you can do that now. And hopefully many of you tuning in can really put into practice the notions that were shared by Gloria, Desiree, Will, and Sandy. So take care, everyone, and we hope to see you again real soon.